Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and the UK government keep telling us that they are acting according to the scientific advice. But in this video, I'd like to point out a few little facts that seem to disprove this notion. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, in the UK, the advisors are formed into a group known as SAGE, which is Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. The problem is that the government are not being open about who is sitting on this group. We know a few from things that they've said publicly, but we should know the full list so that we can verify that they have the appropriate level of expertise for advising in a scenario such as this viral pandemic. In fact, much regarding SAGE is being kept secret. On the government page, there is a link to the scientific evidence supporting the UK government response. This is excellent. You look on the page and it goes, the scientific evidence for the government's measures. Brilliant. That's exactly what we want. That's what people have been crying out for. There's a link to it here. I'll just click on the link. But oh no, it doesn't actually go anywhere. It just sends you back to the top of the page. And all this page is doing is explaining what SAGE is and what its role is in the coronavirus. So there is no evidence via the link. And the same is true of all links of interest. There are lots of links in there that just look like the sorts of things you'd expect to find, but it just takes you back to the front of the page. And this is indicative of the fact that this is not normal. Those links have been put there because it's for information that should be there and isn't. It's been kept from the public. So if the government were being advised by the foremost experts on viral pandemics and, as importantly, listening to them, why on earth would they wish to keep this secret from the public? Secondly, there is one curious piece of advice when dealing with the infections. Now, much of the government's advice is now sound. Social distancing, only going outside when necessary or for prescribed activities, not visiting other households, not spitting in strangers' faces, all very practical advice. But there is one piece of government advice that is highly, highly suspect. The UK government say that if you begin to exhibit symptoms of the coronavirus, that you should isolate for 7 days from the onset of those symptoms. Now, the international consensus is not that. The international world, of course the world's international, believe that you should isolate for 14 days from the end of symptoms. So the UK government are saying 7 days from the start of symptoms. The rest of the world saying 14 days from the end of symptoms. Now, that's several weeks difference, really. So why are the UK government saying that you need to isolate for much less time than the rest of the world? What is the scientific evidence on which our government is saying that the rest of the world, including countries with a way lower death rate, have got it wrong? Because this isn't a situation of where the UK thinks this, some other countries think this, and some other countries think this. This is literally the UK saying one thing and the rest of the world saying another. No idea. Shadow ministers have even been bugged, government ministers about it and not received a reply in weeks. They've been saying for weeks, what is the scientific evidence on which you are basing this measure? And they have not received a response, which is appalling. So we have a situation where the government are not being open about whose advice they are listening to. And we seem to be suggesting that our scientific advice is better than the rest of the world, but without saying why. And with that alone, I would be doubtful that the government are being led by scientific advice. It sounds much more like taking political advice and then seeking to bat away any criticism later on by blaming the scientific advice for being wrong. They'll just use the same old thing, the science must have changed. No, it didn't. You just didn't listen to it. But then there's the final clear-cut example for me of how decisions have nothing to do with scientific advice. Senior members of the government are split as to when we should end the lockdown. Now, if the government were really going along with the scientific advice, they would not be split along these lines at all. They would all agree that measures need to remain in place until the scientific advice says that it was safe to ease some of the restrictions, at which point they would then all agree that restrictions should be eased along those lines. It's quite simple. But Michael Gove and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak want the lockdown ending pretty quickly. We already know from last week that a good number of cabinet members, about 10 of them, want an almost immediate end to the lockdown. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, represents a section of Cabinet that wants the easing of the lockdown only when the infection is under control. Fortunately, he also has the backing of Dominic Cummings, so the lockdown is likely to remain in place for a while yet. And given their roles, you can also see the very political thinking of when the lockdown should be ended. Hancock wants the measures to remain in place because he is accountable for the performance of our health service. He knows that easing the measures early will hit us with a second wave. The Chancellor, on the other hand, is more responsible for the performance of the economy. And economists have already largely abandoned the earlier notion of a V-shaped recovery, which is as soon as you ease lockdowns, you'll get an immediate bounce back. So he's asked his department to model a U-shaped recovery, as there is a greater expectation of the people who have been made unemployed as a result of this crisis taking a lot longer than might be hoped to find work once lockdown is eased. So ministers are either acting in the interests of their department or their own political interests, and not at all heeding the scientific advice. So at a time when the public are more interested in what the experts have to say, at long last, the UK government are still not catching up on the concept of listening to the grown-ups in the most serious national crisis of their lifetimes. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.